We have a handful of attendees, so I think we can go ahead and get started, and hopefully anyone else who joins will catch up. So welcome everyone to the draft EIR public meeting for the Cargill Mixed Sea Salts Processing and Brine Discharge Project. My name is Jackie Zipkin. I am the General Manager of the East Bay Dischargers Authority, or EBDA, and we are the lead agency for this project. Next slide, please. So as it says there, we're the lead agency. We have hired Ascent Environmental to conduct this environmental impact assessment and develop the report for us. And Andrea Shepard and Jamie Kirchner from Ascent will be presenting today to walk you all through the project. If you have any technical questions, you can put them into the Q&A. I believe the chat is disabled for the webinar, so you can reach out to us via the Q&A box and we'll do our best to get back to you. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Andrea.
Next slide, please. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Andrea Shepard. I'm the project manager on this project for Ascent Environmental, working on behalf of EBDA, East Bay Discharges Authority, preparing the environmental impact report to comply with CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. So thank you, everyone, for attending today. The presentation is being recorded. That will help facilitate a transcript of the comments, as the point of this meeting is to hear oral input on the project and get your comments on the draft EIR. During the presentation, all the video cameras for participants will be off, as will your microphones. They'll be muted. At the end of the meeting, after the presentation, we'll provide an opportunity for you to raise your hand, and you'll be unmuted to provide oral comments, and you'll each have 3 minutes to provide oral comments. Written comments are encouraged, and even if you give oral comments today, we ask that you submit them in writing as well. Written comments will be accepted by mail or email, and we'll provide the contact information at the end of the presentation. The public comment period is open until February 17th, until 5 p.m. If during the presentation you have questions, you need clarification on the project, or you have questions about how to use Zoom, it's not working for you, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to type in a comment, and we will do our best to address them. If your comment is a technical nature in terms of the EIR and the analysis, we will be accepting those comments today, but we won't be responding to those comments. Those comments will be responded to in the final EIR. And this presentation is available on EBDA's website at this URL here. We'll have this up again at the end of the presentation as well. This is also where you can find a copy of the draft EIR. Next slide, please. Jamie, why don't you walk them through how to use the Zoom features?
Hello, as Jackie and Andrea mentioned, the chat will be turned off. We will be using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen for all comments and questions, or if you have any Zoom issues that you need assistance with. If you are on a desktop and using the web version of Zoom, you're going to find the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. You can see on the image below. If you are using your mobile phone, you're going to have to click the 3 dots for the more options to get access to the Q&A and to ask a question to submit it that way. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to begin the presentation with some background on EBDA and Cargill, the project proponent, and then we'll go over a description of the proposed project. And then we'll spend some time on the environmental review process and going over the conclusions of the draft EIR. Once we've completed that, we will open it up for receiving comments. And again, we're looking for comments on the adequacy of the EIR analysis. Please note that EBDA will not be making any decisions on the project today. There'll be no consideration or action at today's meeting. That will happen after the final EIR is published. Next slide, please. So we'll begin with some project background. Next slide. First, I wanted to introduce you to East Bay Discharges Authority in a little bit more detail. East Bay Discharges Authority, or you'll hear me use EBDA throughout the rest of this meeting, is a joint powers public agency consisting of 5 local agencies. They include the City of San Leandro, Oraloma Sanitary District, Castro Valley Sanitary District, City of Hayward, and Union Sanitary District. EBDA manages treated effluent from the member agencies, as well as the Livermore-Amador Valley Water Management Agency, which is the blue line that you see on the figure. It manages the treated effluent from these agencies and discharges it through a common outfall and diffuser into a deep water portion of San Francisco Bay. It does this under a National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit, or NPDES permit. As far as the components of EBDA system, it consists of 3 effluent pump stations, a dechlorination facility, which is up near where the outfall, sorry, it's number 1 on the figure, is the dechlorination facility. And then also the combined effluent pipeline, or force main, and the outfall itself. So those are the main components that are owned and operated by EBDA. Next slide, please. Now, Cargill is the project proponent for this project. Cargill operates a solar sea salt production facility in Newark, adjacent to the San Francisco Bay. Cargill's solar salt system is separated from the bay and from local streams and flood control channels by a system of earthen berms, with outboard berms abutting the bay, sloughs, and tidal marshes. The berms enclose salt ponds, and these were built for the exclusive purpose of producing salts, namely sodium chloride and a concentrated magnesium chloride brine, also known as liquid bittern. And it does this through a solar evaporation process using these shallow ponds. The solar salt production process begins with the intake of bay water, which enters Cargill's system through pumps or tide gates. The bay water is generally taken into the system during the high tides in the dry months. And once in the salt production process, the bay water becomes known as brine. And the brine is moved through a series of sequential concentrators, or concentrator ponds, until it reaches a concentration close to the point where the sodium chloride will precipitate out. Siphons, pipelines, and brine channels allow the brine to be moved through the system and under sloughs and the bay, as well as under infrastructure such as roadways. When the brine reaches saturation, it is transferred to crystallizer ponds, where the sodium chloride precipitation occurs and can then be harvested from the beds after the remaining brine in those ponds is removed. The remaining brine continues through the salt production process, where further sodium chloride may be recovered, and liquid bittern, that concentrated magnesium chloride brine, is harvested for production of other commercial products. The remaining brine also contains other salts, though, that are present in bay water, namely magnesium sulfate and additional sodium chloride and magnesium chloride. And if you weren't aware, magnesium sulfate is also known as Epsom salts. And these additional salts are referred to as mixed sea salts. The mixed sea salts are precipitated in 2 ponds, ponds 12 and 13, which are shown in the green, the aqua green color in the figure. And they're precipitated out in those 2 ponds during the processing of the liquid bittern. Cargill generates mixed sea salts at a rate of approximately 60,000 tons per year in those 2 ponds. And there are currently approximately 6 million tons of mixed sea salts stored in those 2 ponds. Now, Cargill is concerned that over time, the berms containing this mixed sea salt inventory could be overtopped and or fail from increased wind and wave action triggered by sea level rise, and that could release high salinity brine into the bay. And that's the main driver for this project. Next slide, please. Next slide. So the proposed project, basically, the proposed project is going to use an innovative technology developed by Cargill to enhance the extraction of additional liquid bittern from the mixed sea salt inventory at Cargill's solar salt facility that would then dissolve the residual mixed sea salts in bay water to produce more brine that could then be pumped into EBDA's system, EBDA's combined effluent conveyance system, where it would be blended and diluted with the EBDA member agency effluent, and then discharged back into the bay in accordance with EBDA's NPDES permit. So in the event of a future berm failure or overtopping primarily, because the berms are maintained, but with overtopping from increased wind and wave action triggered by sea level rise, removing the MSS salts stored in the pond would reduce the potential for release of high salinity brine into San Francisco Bay. Next slide, please. So the project itself has two sets of components, what we like to refer to as on-site components, which are those facilities that are being constructed at Cargill's solar salt facility, and then an off-site component, which is the mixed sea salt brine transport pipeline, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I just wanted to briefly cover the new facilities at the solar salt facility. The crystallized sea salts in the bay muds in Pond 12 would be dissolved using bay water that is pumped from a new pump station on Plummer Creek to a new dissolution water pond at the north end of Pond 10. And then a new dissolution water pump station adjacent to the new Plummer Creek pump station would pump that water through a new distribution system into an innovative micro-trenching system installed in Pond 12 to start out with, to dissolve the mixed sea salts that have crystallized in that pond. Then the additional liquid bittern would be recovered from those, from the salts that have been dissolved, basically. They'd be recovered from the pond and pumped into the other pond, Pond 13, where they could be further processed and the liquid bittern could be harvested. Then after Pond 12 is harvested or processed, the microtrenching system would be installed in Pond 13, and the process would be repeated, and then the additional liquid bittern would be pumped back over to Pond 12, where it would be further processed and harvested. The remaining brine after the processing of each pond would be pumped using a new pump station, a mixed sea salt brine pump station installed adjacent to each of the ponds, and those pumps would pump the brine into a new pipeline that would carry the brine, the mixed sea salt brine, to EBDA's system. Next slide, please. So this figure here shows the route that the pipeline would take to get to EBDA's system. We have the Newark facility down at the bottom of the map, and we have the Oro Loma Sanitary District's water pollution control plant up near the top of the figure. It would be a 14-inch brine transport pipeline that would be constructed and extend north, primarily along roadway rights of way for approximately 15.6 miles, again, connecting the solar salt facility to the Oro Loma effluent pump station just beyond the Oro Loma Sanitary District, Castro Valley Sanitary District's water pollution control plant in San Lorenzo, which is up at the north end of the map. Based on the current design, the transport pipeline would be located within portions of Thornton Avenue, Paseo Padre Parkway, Ardenwood Boulevard, Union City Boulevard, Hesperian Boulevard, Eden Shores Boulevard, Marina Drive, Industrial Boulevard, Baumberg Avenue, Arden Road, Corporate Avenue, Investment Boulevard, Production Avenue, Claywider Road, and West Winton Avenue and Corsair Boulevard. That's the route that that is being proposed. And the brine transport pipeline would tie into EBDA's combined effluent system immediately downstream of the plant at the OLEPS, or the Oro Loma effluent pump station. And that's where it would be combined with treated effluents from the other agencies and then discharged back into EBDA's conveyance system and out to the discharge point in the bay, the outfall. So that is the proposed project. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about the environmental review process and provide our conclusions from the draft EIR, or summarize them at least. Next slide, please. So first off, the environmental impact report that we prepared is prepared under the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. CEQA provides information to the public and decision makers about the potential significant environmental impacts of a project. It identifies ways to avoid or reduce significant impacts, and it does not require that projects with significant impacts be denied if EBDA finds there are economic, social, or other conditions that would justify project approval. Next slide, please. So EBDA has determined that an environmental impact report needed to be prepared because there could be a potential for significant impacts of the project. The EIR describes all phases of the project, including construction and operations. It identifies the potential physical, environmental, or physical impacts on the environment, and it recommends feasible mitigation measures that would reduce potentially significant impacts. It also identifies alternatives that may reduce one or more significant impacts of the project as required under CEQA. CEQA requires EIRs to describe a range of reasonable alternatives to a project or to the location of a project, which would feasibly attain most of the basic objectives of a project, but would avoid or substantially lessen any of the significant effects of the project, and then evaluate the comparative merits of the alternatives. CEQA also requires that a no project alternative be considered, and that allows decision makers to compare the impacts of approving a proposed project with impacts of not approving the project. Once the EIR is prepared, it is put out for public review, which is the part of the process we are in now. And then comments are responded to, and a final EIR is prepared. The final EIR has to be certified to complete the CEQA process, but certification of the EIR does not indicate project approval. That's a separate decision. And again, I just want to reiterate that identification of significant impacts of a project does not require that a project be denied. If EBDA finds that economic, social, or other overriding considerations would justify approval, a project may still be approved. Next slide, please. So this slide describes the EIR process, which I've kind of alluded to already a little bit. The first part of the process is to issue a notice of preparation that an EIR is going to be prepared. That was done back in May of 2022. We issued an NOP, or notice of preparation, and then we issued a revised notice of preparation based on some changes in the alignment for the MS Brine pipeline. We issued that revised NOP on July 8th. That went out to responsible agencies, interested parties, and organizations, as well as individuals that could have an interest in the proposed project. The purpose of the NOP was to provide notification, as I mentioned, and to solicit input on the scope and content of the EIR. EBDA also held an online public scoping meeting similar to this on June 1st to inform interested parties about the project and to provide an opportunity to provide oral input on the scope and content of the EIR. The draft EIR that was prepared and has been issued, it was released on January 4th and is available at the web address shown here on the slide. That EIR takes into account the comments that we received during the scoping process, and it's out for a 45-day public review period, which again ends on February 17th. Today, we're conducting the public meeting to provide an opportunity for oral input, but you will have until February 17th to provide written comments. Once the written comments are received, we will prepare a final EIR, which will respond to all of the comments received on the draft EIR. And that document will be issued, and then Cargill will consider the final EIR and make a decision on the project, whether to approve or deny the project. Next slide, please. So this slide just summarizes the issue areas that were scoped out of the draft EIR. They were not addressed in detail in the draft EIR based on the scoping process. Next slide, please. And this slide summarizes the resource topics that were addressed in detail in the EIR. Those identified in bold, blue bold, those issue areas were issues where we found that the project could have potentially significant impacts on the environment, at least for one potential impact that could be significant. And mitigation was identified and included in the EIR that would reduce that impact to a less than significant level. There was one resource area, noise in particular, construction-related noise effects, that was found to be significant and unavoidable. We, because of the proximity of sensitive receptors to the pipeline alignment, we found that it would not be possible to reduce the noise levels during construction below the local ordinance requirements. And that impact was considered significant and unavoidable even after implementation of mitigation measures that are identified in the EIR. Next slide, please. As I mentioned before, CEQA also requires evaluation of alternatives. We evaluated 3 alternatives in the EIR. The no project alternative, which is required, as I mentioned, and then 2 other action alternatives. The no project alternative essentially would not construct the project and would be the status quo. EBDA would continue to operate as it's currently operating, and solar salt facility, Cargill's facility, will continue to operate as it's currently operating and continue to increase its inventory of mixed sea salts. There would be no construction impacts, therefore, because there would be no construction, but this project obviously would not meet any of the project objectives. The in-pipe alternative, or alternative 1, is the pink and blue that you see here on the figure. This alternative would use a combination of new pipeline and existing EBDA pipeline. It assumes a shorter route for the mixed sea salts brine transport pipeline, 7.5 miles of new pipeline, that is the pink, from the solar salt facility up to what is the Alvarado treatment plant. And at that point, or just north of there, the pipeline would connect to EBDA's system just downstream of the Alvarado treatment plant in Union City. And rather than, and this is rather than obviously up at the north end at the Oraloma plant. So it would connect in much sooner and would require less construction of pipeline. However, this alternative would require the installation of 4 miles of slip liner in EBDA's system. That's the blue length, the solid blue length, that is, because that part of EBDA's system would be have a greater potential for corrosion due to introduction of the brine into their pipeline. Alternative 1 would result in some impacts that are greater than those of the projects, including greater potential to disturb known archaeological resources, special status species, release of pollutants if the site was inundated, and so on. But most of the impacts under this alternative would be reduced compared to the proposed project. For example, there'd be a reduced degree of construction and excavation, and therefore less potential to result in water quality impacts and things like that, and less emissions of air pollutants and so forth. It would also have a reduced construction-related noise impact compared to the proposed project, but it would still exceed the thresholds and would still have a significant unavoidable impact related to noise. It's just that there would be less opportunity. The Bayside parallel pipe alternative assumes approximately 17 miles of new pipeline, new MS brine transport pipeline that would travel along the edges of Cargill's salt ponds instead of the 16-mile route along roadways. Because the pipelines under this alignment will be located farther away from urban areas under this alternative, there would be fewer sensitive receptors that would be exposed to noise during construction, and the public would be exposed to fewer safety hazards. But even with mitigation, the construction-related noise and vibration would remain significant and unavoidable under this alternative as well. Additionally, the higher degree of construction and excavation required under this alternative would have a higher potential to impact sensitive habitat. Obviously, it's going through the marshes, so that's a concern. Okay, I'm sorry. And it would also, because it's going through the marshes, it would require a much more involved permitting process, which is less desirable. Next slide, please. So now let's talk about the public input process, and then we can open it up to public comments. How do you provide comments today and or prior to the end of the comment period? Again, you can provide oral comments today by raising your Zoom hand, or if you're on the phone, you can press *9. You can enter written comments into the Zoom chat, or I should say the Zoom Q&A, not the chat. Or you can mail or email written comments by 5 p.m. on February 17th to Jackie Zipkin at the address shown here, and her email address is also shown here. Her address is East Bay Dischargers Authority, 2651 Grant Avenue, San Lorenzo, California, 94580. Please make that those mailed comments to the attention of Jackie Zipkin, General Manager. Or you can email your comments to jzipkin, that's JZIPKIN, at ebda.org or ebda.org. Next slide, please. So before we begin, just a few more instructions. We want to make sure that you clearly state your name and organization before you begin your comment. Please remember that comments are being recorded, and please focus your comments on the adequacy of the environmental analysis. We won't be responding to those comments during today's meeting. We will respond to those as part of the final EIR. And each commenter will have 3 minutes, and we'll have a timer, and Jamie's going to explain that now. Next slide, please.
As a reminder, if you would like to raise your hand, you will see at the bottom of the screen, there is a raised hand if you're on the desktop. Once it's your turn to speak, we will announce your name, and you will see a box pop up that says the host would like you to unmute your microphone. You can go ahead and press the unmute button and then give your comments. If you're calling in by phone, please press *9 to raise your hand. Listen for your phone number to be called out, and then you will hear a message. The host would like you to unmute your microphone. You can press *6 to unmute. After you're done giving your comment, you can press *6 to remute yourself. Please limit comments to 3 minutes. There will be a warning sound at 30 seconds and 10 seconds remaining, and then you'll be muted after 3 minutes.
I don't see anyone raising their hand. Do you, Jamie?
No, there's nobody currently raising their hand.
The person on the phone, are you able to unmute them just in case they have a comment, if they're having trouble?
Yes. The phone number ending in 0006 has been asked to unmute if they would like to give a comment.
Okay, we'll just give it 1 more minute, and if there are no comments, we can close the meeting, and we look forward to receiving your written comments by February 17th. So let's just hold on for another minute, give people time to collect their thoughts. Well, I don't think anyone is looking to provide comments today, Jamie, so we can go to the next slide and we'll close things out. Thank you everyone for attending today. We appreciate your time. And again, we look forward to receiving your comments by February 17th at 5 p.m. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A. We'll leave the Q&A open for just a moment. And otherwise, we will adjourn the meeting. Thank you.